Today we're talking about criticism. Criticism. You ever criticized by somebody? Elbert Hubbard said to avoid criticism, say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing, and nobody will criticize you. But chances are, somewhere along the way, that's going to happen to you. I remember Mayor Richard Daley of Chicago back in the 60s, the tumultuous 60s. He said, maybe tongue-in-cheek, "They have vilified me, they have crucified me, they've even criticized me." And we've been on the receiving end of that before. Psalm 141, the words are going to be on the screen, but it's best if you have your own copy of the Bible, or electronically or printed page, because we'll be referring to other texts and you can underline in here and it'll mean more to you. Notice all the body parts that we're going to be reading about. I stepped into a meeting of the RAs on Wednesday night and they were reading this, getting ready for today. And I just started counting all the body parts, and it reminded me that our bodies belong to God just like our soul does. Our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and we're to present our bodies, every part of them, to God every day as instruments of righteousness. 141 verse 1. I call to you, Lord, come quickly to me. Hear me when I call to you. May my prayer be set before you like incense. May the lifting up of my hands be like the evening sacrifice. Set a guard over my mouth, Lord. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Do not let my heart be drawn to what is evil, so that I take part in wicked deeds along with those who are evildoers. Do not let me eat their delicacies. Let a righteous man strike me. Now that's a kindness. Let him rebuke me. That is oil on my head. My head will not refuse it. For my prayer will still be against the deeds of evildoers. Their rulers will be thrown down from the cliffs. The wicked will learn that my words were well spoken. They will say, as one plows and breaks up the earth, so our bones have been scattered at the mouth of the grave. But my eyes are fixed on you, sovereign Lord. In you I take refuge. Do not give me over to death. Keep me safe from the traps set by evildoers, from the snares they have laid for me. Let the wicked fall into their own nets, while I pass by in safety. God's word for God's people today. Thanks be to God. Christians need to learn how to handle criticism. Very careful in receiving it, and just as careful in giving it. And we do both. So I want to talk on both ends of this issue today. And if you're not being criticized by somebody, you just hold on. The day will come. So take some good notes and maybe you'll be ready. Here's the sad reality. The sad reality is that there are critics in the world whose entire intention is to harm us. They just don't like you, and they want to hurt you, and they've discovered they can do it with words. They can do it with criticism. And they don't have a good motive at all. They simply want to harm. David writes about people like that in the psalm preceding this one. Just look back a page. Psalm number 140, verse 3. They make their tongues as sharp as a serpent's. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Verse 4. Protect me from the violent who devise ways to trip my feet. Their intention is to do harm. The church my father-in-law attends in Southside Virginia had a visitor show up last Sunday. They weren't expecting him. It was a 6-foot-long black snake. It crawled into the building, I guess, during the call to worship. Now, you're bothered by cicadas. Cicadas are not going to hurt you. But this black snake was in there, and 3 strong ushers had to pick him up and take him out, and they put him out toward the cemetery that surrounds the church. 10 minutes later, he was back, climbing up onto the front porch, trying to get in. And I guess he wanted to hear what the preacher had to say, really wanted to hear it. The same ushers picked him up, took him farther out this time, to the other side of the road. Now, snakes don't belong in church. You have to admire that particular snake's tenacity, but they don't belong there. The snake shows up in the garden, and everything was going fine in the Garden of Eden until the serpent showed up. Later in the book of Revelation, he is identified as that old serpent, the devil. He doesn't belong, but he still tries to get in. And he tries to get into your life, sometimes through the words of critics. Now, why do they do it? Why are people critical of you unfairly? And why are they so hurtful with their words? Well, Jesus answered the question, I think, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. The mouth speaks what the heart is full of. What's in your heart is going to come out of your lips eventually like a stick of dynamite. You don't know when it's going to explode. But if it's there, it's going to happen. Why are critics so harsh sometimes? It might be jealousy. They can only feel better about themselves if they tear you down. They see life as a zero-sum game. If you're winning, they're losing. And if they're winning, you must lose. And so they dish out the criticism. But let's be honest. Some criticism is justified. I won't say most, but some of it is. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming that I am persecuted whenever I am contradicted." Somebody challenges you at work or in the community, maybe even in your house. They challenge something you've said or something you've done, and they're justified in it. The criticism comes fairly. What are you supposed to do with that? Well, you can close your ears to any criticism. You can see yourself as better than others and beyond complaint. Or you can see that good can come from criticism. Even in the unfair kind, there's usually at least a kernel of truth. You can disregard a lot of it, but don't miss that kernel. But I'm talking now about justified criticism. Look at what David says about it in 141 verse 5. Let a righteous man strike me, that is a kindness. Let him rebuke me, that is oil on my head. Somebody asked me about that oil on the head after the last service. That is a sign of refreshment. When you visited somebody on those hot and dusty roads, they would wash your feet or have a servant do it, and they would also put a little bit of oil, like perfume, on your head, just to refresh you. David says, when a righteous man rebukes me, when a righteous man criticizes me, strikes me verbally anyway, that's okay. See the good that can come from it. Proverbs 27 verse 6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. When somebody cares about you, when they are your friend, they may have to speak a word of complaint and criticism. They may have to, but their hearts are right. Their hearts are pure in that. So receive the good. Somebody that doesn't like me very much is my cardiologist. Every time I see him, and we've been doing these video meetings, he always finds fault with what I'm doing. I'm not taking my medicine like I should. I'm not exercising like I ought to. And I don't even want to talk to him, but I have to. But he's right. And every session ends with, I'll do better, Doc. I'll do better. In the Old Testament, David, the same guy who writes this psalm, David wandered off into sin. The man after God's own heart, the shepherd king of Israel, he got off into adultery and then murder and lying. And who's going to say anything to the king about that? He's above reproach. But one man, Nathan, was willing to risk it, and he went and he told the king, what you've done is wrong. And David's heart was changed under that conviction. Paul in the New Testament confronts Peter. St. Peter, confronts him because of a little bit of hypocrisy in Peter's life. Paul writes in Galatians 2, I withstood him to his face because it was necessary. Proverbs 27 verse 17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. When the criticism is justified, see it as a blessing and not a curse, and receive it graciously and humbly. Don't fold your arms across your chest and turn your back away or hang up the phone. Receive it graciously. Thank you. Thank you. I needed to hear that. It doesn't feel good, but I needed it. Thank you. Don't argue. Maybe they are overstating it. Maybe it's not exactly the way they see it, but enough of it is. You can explain yourself later. Right now, be thankful for the critic who stepped into your life. It's going to be important, though, that you not respond in kind to unfair criticism. When somebody's just out to get you, they don't like anything about you, and they found a weakness, a chink in the armor, don't respond in kind. You'll want to, because you're human. You'll want to lash out at them. Yeah, but what about? Don't do it. James chapter 3, verse 9. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who've been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. Now, I heard praise coming out of your mouth a moment ago. Praise is for God, blessings. But if I were with you 24 hours a day, what would I hear? What would you hear if you were following me? Unkindnesses spoken about other people. This ought not to be, brothers and sisters. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? No, it's got to be one or the other. So don't respond in kind. Our example in this, as in most everything else, is Jesus. Make a note of that. We're Christ followers. We follow him. If he said it, we say it. If he believed it, we believe it. If he did it, we join him. If he's going, we're going with him. Jesus is our example. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, Peter writes this. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. You've seen images of Jesus on the cross. You've read about it all your life, but you've seen movies and portrayals of it, and you know all the insults hurled at him and all the unfair accusations. If anybody was totally innocent, it was Jesus, tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sin. But notice what he does, or what he doesn't do. He doesn't retaliate verbally. The most he says about it is, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Now that's Jesus, and you're not Jesus. I know that. And you're not going to do this perfectly. But this should be our goal. This should be what we aspire to, not responding in retaliation. But what do you do? What are you supposed to do when you're criticized unfairly? Well, one thing you can do is talk to yourself. Talk to yourself. Don't listen to yourself so much, but to yourself. If you're listening, you may be listening to old tapes from words your mom or dad said to you a generation ago, or something and a disgruntled friend said or a critic said, and you'll begin to believe that, and you'll be down on yourself. Psalm 42 and 43, it's one long psalm actually in the Old Testament. Why are you downcast, O my soul? The psalmist is talking to himself. Why are you downcast? Hope in God, I will ever praise him. Talk to yourself and remind yourself that God is there. Paul was criticized a lot in his ministry, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, he says, my conscience is clear. One day I'll stand before God and he will judge me. But let's not judge anything before the time. My conscience is clear. And you know, if your conscience is clear, if you know what you said, if you know what you did, and it's not at all what they're saying, your conscience is clear. You don't have to hurl bricks back at them to stand true in who you are. Talk to yourself. And then talk to God. Talk to God. That's what he's doing at the first couple of verses of Psalm 140 and the first couple of verses of Psalm 141. Look at 141:1. I call to you, Lord. Come quickly to me. Hear me when I call you. One woman said that she was God's neighbor from the apartment below, standing there with a broomstick, beating on the ceiling sometimes, wanting God's attention. I think of that with this psalmist, David. Look at how he's talking to God. Come and help me right now. May my prayer be set before you like incense. May the lifting up of my hands be like the evening sacrifice. This is the evening prayer. Talk to God. You're unfairly criticized. Talk to God about it. Talk to God about your critics. And what are you going to say to him? What are you going to tell God to do with them? Again, Jesus is our example. He said in Matthew 5, love your enemies. You know, love, you've been in love before. Maybe you're in love right now. And usually when we use the word, we're speaking of an emotion. You fall into it. It's something you feel. But in the Bible, love is not an emotion. It is an action. And I know that because Jesus is commanding us to love. And we have a hard enough time loving our family and loving our friends. He says, love your enemies. It's a choice you make. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. Does anybody live like this? Gandhi said he'd have become a Christian if he'd ever met one who lived this. And there are people waiting to come to faith if they could just see a tangible example walking. And you'll have the chance to be that this week, wherever you go. Pray for them who spitefully use you and persecute you. Pray for them. Talk to God about them. And keep your eyes fixed on the Lord. Look down at verse 8. But my eyes are fixed on you, sovereign Lord. In you I take refuge. Do not give me over to death. Eugene Peterson translates verse 8. I only have eyes for you. You remember that song? I only have eyes for you. Don't look so much at the critic. It's not the critic who counts, Theodore Roosevelt said. Not the man who points out where the strong man fails. It's the man in the arena who counts. It's you living your life, trying your best to serve God. It's not the critic who really counts. So don't look at the critic. Take some good from the criticism if you can find it, but keep your eyes fixed on the Lord and trust Him to vindicate you one day. God's not lost control, and He's not going to forget. Trust Him. Psalm 140, verse 12 says, I know that the Lord secures justice for the poor and upholds the cause of the needy. Surely the righteous will praise your name, and the upright will live in your presence. That's what Jesus did on the cross. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. He trusted him. And that's what we're called to do. Now, I'll tell you what I think the psalm is really about. I think David is writing what he's writing because he's afraid of something. He's afraid that he's going to get drawn into that same kind of lifestyle. Resist the temptation to become a critic yourself. Don't join that chorus of critics. Look at verse 4, 141, verse 4. Do not let my heart be drawn to what is evil. He says that because his heart is being drawn to evil, and so is yours and mine. Do not let your heart be drawn to what is evil, so that I may take part in wicked deeds, along with those who are evildoers. Do not let me eat their delicacies. Oh, it smells so good and it tastes so sweet. I want it, but don't let me be drawn to that. We become comfortable and feel safe when we're around people who believe the same things we do about everything. We draw strength from that. There's confidence in numbers. It's kind of an echo chamber. We're hearing the same things, the things that ratify what we already think. And if that's a critical spirit, then that begins to show up in us too. Critics are able to find each other. They've always got their ears attuned. And they'll find you and enlist you to be a part of the chorus. Somebody went to their pastor. It wasn't me. Somebody went to their pastor and said, Pastor, let me tell you what they're saying about you out there. And the pastor stopped him. He said, I'm not so interested in what they're saying about me out there. I'm more curious, why do you think they're telling you? Don't join in the chorus. This is David's concern. People today seem to be more afraid of being alone than being right or wrong. Advertisers know this, so often they will tout their product as a bestseller or rapidly growing in popularity. They don't even need to tell you that it works. That's not as important as them believing or you believing that everybody thinks it works. C.S. Lewis said people tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. So we become like the people with whom we associate. You can choose your companions in this life. You can go with the critics, or you can chart a different course. Remember the awesome power of words. The awesome power of words. Just little things. But they can make such a difference. When you were growing up, did they teach you sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me? Sounds good, but it isn't true, is it? Now, sticks and stones will hurt you for sure, but words can do just as much damage. And you know that because it's happened to you. Don't turn around now and hurt somebody else. Cripple them, paralyze them by the harshness of your words. Rather, as Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, speak the truth in love. Sometimes criticism needs to be shared. This is not an argument against all criticism. Sometimes it's necessary. If you're an employer and you've got employees that are not doing their job, you've got to point that out. You've got to show them. And maybe you've shown them many times and now you've got to let them go. People you care about are getting into things that are wrong. Judge not lest you be judged doesn't mean you turn a blind eye to everything. It just means you take care of the beam in your own eye before you go after the speck in somebody else's. But sometimes you do have to go after the speck in somebody else's eye. But be very, very careful. If you take secret delight in doing it, if you're just chomping at the bit to straighten that person out, you're probably not the person for the job. Or if you cannot do it in love, you're not the person for the job. If there's somebody else who's better equipped, let that person do it instead of you. And trust God to have His will done. Abraham Lincoln once said about a certain person that he didn't like. And politicians have all kinds of enemies, and Lincoln had his share, more than his share. He said, I don't like that man. I should get to know him better. And that's one thing to do with your enemies. While you're trying to muster the courage to pray for them and forgive them, get to know them. You might find you like them more than you thought. You can criticize with words and destroy, or you can use words to build up. They can do that just as well. To build up, to encourage, to strengthen. And you know that because somewhere along the way in your life, somebody said something to you at just the right moment, and it changed your life. I was thinking the other day, I don't have a lot of things I'm good at. I'm kind of a one-talent sort of person. But words are my currency. It's what I deal with. So if words are mine to use, why not use them to build somebody up, to make them feel stronger and better? And I want to commit I don't do it perfectly, but I want to commit myself to doing that every day, to say something to somebody that makes their load lighter. I notice it most often when I'm in a fast food restaurant and there's a college kid or a high school graduate, summer job behind the counter, and they weren't properly trained and they don't know what they're doing. And so things are backing up and the food isn't right and the order isn't right and all of that. And the person in front of me at the counter is just letting them have it. Just doing everything but cursing and sometimes that. And I can see it all over their face, the hurt. They're going to go to college and be a brain surgeon one day. They're not going to be serving hamburgers all their life. But in this moment, they feel like a failure. So when I get up to the counter, I say, you're doing just great. Take your time. I got all the time in the world. You're going to get this. And you can see it all over their face. Things lighten up. And I think they probably go the rest of the day in the encouragement of those words. They are powerful things. So speak words that build up. Psalm 141. I hope it's helpful to you. I hope you can use it this week, even this day.